Good evening, everyone. Does everyone see my screen and hear my voice? Good. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Hi, Greta. Thank you, everyone, for attending. This is our fourth roundtable on homeless and shelter awareness from the Boston Society of Architect Knowledge Communities. Thank you for the Boston Society for allowing us to have this forum on different topics. Our roundtable is focused on homeless and shelter. And today we're going to focus on equity and inclusion in the public realm. And joining us is Iris Lynn. She's a senior landscape architect from Halverson, Tig and Bond. Also, she'll be talking about the outdoor spaces and the design of outdoor spaces. And then Joe Rondinelli is a design leader, interior design leader. He'll be focusing on public spaces, in particular, public libraries as an interior space where homeless population hang out part of their day. And I'm Joan Corey, the chair. So by the way, November is Homeless Awareness Month, so this is perfect. And we're gonna get started with the slides. So I put this in, it says inclusive cities, and a lot of us who works in the field have read this before, so I'm not gonna read it, but I wanna emphasize on all of these things, the economic condition, the gender, and so on and so forth, and we'll see it throughout our presentation to be inclusive. However, we wanna focus also on the homeless population in terms of how health and addiction is part of their struggle as they hang out in these public spaces. So health is high up on our radar as a cause of this challenge that we have in our cities. And I'm not going to go into a detail really about how a homeless person spend their day, but just for the sake of this presentation is we want to focus on the time of the day. So about 6 a.m. is when they have their breakfast, and different shelters have different timing. So 7 or 8, they have to go outside because the shelter need to take care of the space. And then also they want these homeless people also to go and do what they need to do and to take care of their lives, and whether that's looking for work or educating themselves or taking care of their health or what have you. And then at around 4 o'clock or 3:30, then they're allowed back in the shelters. And that's sort of the cycle of their day. And you see from these images, a lot of them, they try to go to different facilities to educate themselves, find jobs. So we see them in libraries. Some of them actually do work. But then part of the population, as you see in some of these images, they're just hanging out in the outdoor public space. And I think the numbers is about 30%, but don't quote me on the number because data changes. And without any further ado, I'd like to have Iris start with her ideas and thought and firm work in relation to this aspect of the public space and the homeless population.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thanks for attending the roundtable. My name is Iris Lin, and I'm a senior landscape architect at Halverson Time Bond Studio. So before we dive into the design of an inclusive public space, I think we are all aware that there are a lot of tension between the general public and the unhoused people in public space. The major concern are safety and maintenance. Through community interview done by Spur at a case study at San Jose, they found park users get upset and voice their concern to park manager, not for the interaction with unhoused users, but rather a symptom of homelessness. such as trash and encampment. These complaints usually, Joanne, could you go back?
Sorry.
I have a long introduction. These complaints usually includes requests for removal of public restroom, benches, and overgrown vegetation, which lead to hostile design in the public space. So they are like the misperception that the public space will only be great if there are no homeless people in it. There are a lot of like creative and hostile design generated from this mindset to prevent homeless people occupy the public space. So in the photo here, it shows that designer use boulder or spike to prevent homeless people stay in certain area. But at the same time, it become unsafe and inaccessible to everyone. And the seating element in the photo only allows certain posture or short-term use, which are not uncomfortable for general public users as well. And this design create a lot of barrier for everyone and doesn't make people feel welcome in the space. Okay, next. So instead of punish or prohibiting unhoused people use public space, local leaders can help mitigate these conflicts and balance the need of everyone who use public space like parks, sidewalk, and street. And this approach called inclusive public space management aim to ensure people who are unsheltered have safe and equitable access to public space and manage conflicts between all people using an area. Until the public space celebrates the coexistence of diverse users, it can only become a true great space. Next. So these diagram made by Spur illustrate a successful inclusive public space that includes the effort from safe and flexible spatial design, engaging program and activities, and regular maintenance and operation, as well as appropriate rules and reinforcement. And as landscape architects, our specialty lies on spatial design to accommodate programs and activities. And I'm going to talk about the 5 principles of inclusive design for public space. Next. So there are a lot of factors and elements when we design public space, but the 5 principles that relate to an inclusive public space design are design for safety, diversity, flexibility, well-being, and for sustainability and resilience. Next. So when we to design a public space, we always concerned about the open sideline, and have sufficient lighting during the night, and the design should be allow people to predict what's coming up next, and also have like fall protection for all, and activating public space with amenity and programs also contribute to the overall safety of for the pub users. Next. And also when design for diversity, considering users in different genders, age group, cultural background, and ability during the design process. And we usually aim to provide appropriate sign amenity or space to the needs of diverse users in the public room. And next. And for the design for flexibility in the spatial design, that it could be a large open space that accommodate different size group, like the photo show at the upper right. And it could also be a small semi-public area setback from the major pedestrian corridor, like the photo at the bottom right. Yeah, that's like more quiet and peaceful. So, and also there are different way of furniture arrangement could create dynamic space. They could work for intimate conversation or to promote social interactions. And next. So also like design for flexibility for activity and programs. When we design for accommodating diverse activity that promotes socialization and interaction, that I think will benefit the general public, but as well as the homeless population. And there are also like quiet activity available in the public space, like reading a book or listen to music can help release the stress. Next. Okay. Tranquil space can help people feel calm and relaxed, especially in the urban environment. The study has shown that spending time in nature could help with anxiety and depression, and well-laid-out pace system and amenity can promote physical activity that decrease stress. So, and like gentle water sounds and sunbaths are all simple ingredients to improve the overall well-being of park user. And that includes to help the homeless population as well. Next. So last is design for sustainability and resilience. We all experience more extreme heat and flood in recent years due to climate change. And tree canopy and shade structures can help cool down the environment and allow people to stay outdoor longer, and provide like drinking water fountain to prevent dehydration in extreme heat, and also like have water fountain or mist station. They can help relieve the hot temperature, and install like permeable pavement, and the rain garden could help reduce flood and runoff. So next, Joanne. So to end my presentation, I would like to say that there's still room for improvement, and we can make a more equitable public space for all, especially for the people who experience homelessness. An example shown here is like the mobile shower truck at California, or a public restaurant that's designed to have some visibility at the top and at the bottom to prevent certain crime, or the storage cube on street in Denver, that all they could help unhoused people store their valuable and able to get a job or health care or go into shelter. And also the solar power charging station and hand washing station, or like the bottom right image show a social service booth in a public park. These are all like amenity that we could provide and make it more popular, more common in public space. They would help the vulnerable population, but also benefit the general public. Yeah, to conclude, I think the homelessness is a complex social problem and rely on all of us to work together to improve. Yeah. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Iris. And we'll come back with the questions to Iris at the end where we open it for comments. And this wonderful slide. We're gonna transition to libraries. I'm gonna share a video with you. And please let me know if you see it and hear it. Yep, sound is turned on. And here we go.
An open public place in your city, in your neighborhood.
In 2009, the city of San Francisco became the first in the country to hire a full-time social worker for its main library. Dozens of cities across the country have followed suit.
A lot of the social safety nets have been underfunded or removed. And unfortunately, that often means that there's a crunch on other public institutions like public libraries. They are very trusted institutions, and people feel welcome within them.
People like Andrew Constantino, who, for a time, was a daily visitor to the downtown Seattle library.
The library is like your grandmother's house. If you're homeless or living in poverty, that's exactly what it's like. When you are allowed to be at the library, whereas, if you're homeless, you're not allowed to be many places.
Years ago, Constantino was living on the Seattle streets and in shelters. The library was his refuge, a place to get out of the rain and get back on his feet.
You mentioned the importance of feeling welcome here. What was it like to not feel welcome elsewhere?
Oh, it sucks. It's like everywhere in our society, you have to buy access. If I want to use your bathroom, I have to buy a soda pop.
Public libraries are public, a place where everyone can come together. In one room, recent immigrants practice English.
So I'm gonna stop
In
the
another?
video here and reshare the presentation with Joe Rondinelli.
Thanks, Joanne. Appreciate that. That was a clip from a program, an episode this past July of CBS Sunday Morning. And there were 3 libraries featured, public libraries featured in the clip, and it included San Francisco, Seattle, and the city of Austin. And that's why Joanne asked me to join the conversation today and talk about a project that's very dear to my heart. I was the project interior designer for the Austin Central Library that opened up 5 years ago, actually in 2017. I think we could go to the next slide, Joanne. It was in collaboration with Lake Flato and San Antonio, Lake Flato Architects in San Antonio, while I was at Shepley Bullfinch, a process of probably about 8 years. And although I was focused in higher education as a practice for a couple decades, lots of teaching and learning spaces, I did probably over 50 academic libraries. So I understood somewhat a little bit about the project type. I understood the scale of the project, but I never did a public library prior to this. So there was a lot to really understand about the breadth of community. I understood what it meant to design for an academic community, but for a city, and a city that I'm not from, it was quite a wonderful experience. Shepley was involved with programming, planning, and construction drawings, and Lake Flato was the design architect. So I, as the project interior designer, had a wonderful journey with them in the design process. When I always introduce Austin, oftentimes, and talk about community, I like to introduce a person that I met through an article, Leslie Cochran, early in the design process. And early in programming, we definitely understood the complexity of the homeless population in Austin, quite visible. But when I read this article, and it was, gosh, probably about 13 years ago now, something like that. It was actually right after Leslie passed away, and David Lake actually gave me the article because part of the journey was to understand, getting to know what makes Austin Austin. And Leslie was quite a beloved homeless person on the streets of Austin, and quite sort of embraced by the community. He, at the time when we began the project, there was a tagline to the city, "Keep Austin Weird." And the last really thing that I thought would represent that, although obviously it makes sense by the visuals, that Austin would embrace an eccentric homeless person. And it really, for me, part of a personal journey of understanding the complexity of a city that I wasn't familiar with, something very unexpected from a population. And obviously there was so much more to understand about the population, but it kept in mind always not only the homeless population, but the reminder of understanding the face of the community. We can go on to sort of the next slide. The diversity, comparatively to the academic library, which is, although it's a diverse community, it's quite homogeneous compared to a city. Especially a central library. And the diversity of that community ranges from children and teens, and obviously families, elderly, and of course, homeless population, and the complexities that come with, sort of all the layers within those populations, as Iris begins to sort of address in general. But that's what makes it an exciting building. And that, these were challenges because I never designed for children. I never designed for teens. I was, I want to say, less concerned about sort of the characteristics, and I felt I understood a little bit more about homeless population and various other populations, college and so on and so forth. But the diversity of the populations, and fortunately it was a central library, which meant there was a great deal of space, a 200,000 square foot building. I think we can go to the next slide because to show some of the breadth of the building. Because of this diverse population and the needs and programs for that diversity, the intent for the library is actually, I love what Andrew in the clip said about the welcoming, being a place that's very welcoming. We were looking at the atrium space as the major organizing element, but it was also to really be the living room for the city of Austin. I do kind of like the sense of grandmother's house. I just think that sort of really takes the warm embrace. But that's really what the building was really meant to be. It was meant to really embrace the community, the entire community. And fortunately, that also means for an interior space, a diverse amount of types of spaces. We had a children's area, we had a teens area, we had a civic reading room, we had lots of public seating. So there was a great deal of opportunity for space. And even in the next slide, we had outdoor space. We had a roof deck. Joanne, you can go to the next slide, please. We had a wonderful rooftop deck with views of the city, with views of Lady Bird Lake. We also had a number of reading porches, screened-in reading porches that were connected from the interior or through the interior. And so there was this extreme diverse population, but there was also this opportunity in a new central library to have a wonderful amount of diverse spaces to support that community, where there was this atrium space that really was meant to have the welcoming, the energy, and the spirit of place, which was really quite a fulfilling challenge. In the next slide, Iris sort of talked about a lot of these things in just outdoor public spaces, but it was true in indoor public space also. And this is a civic building. It has a great amount of diversity within users. Iris mentioned then there's layers of diversity within the users themselves. And then there's the program needs of serving all of this layers of diversity. So you have really a great complexity. And the design problem was not to really, there were overlaying elements, which again, were talked about in some of the outdoor spaces, is that it really wasn't, you weren't designing for one population. There were characteristics that applied to all the population, which was, really important and really the focus. For instance, the first two, designing an environment that speaks the spirit of place. If I didn't get that right, the other things sort of would fall short anyways. That was extremely important, that embrace and welcoming of the community as a place that feels safe. Whether, you're an elderly person, whether you're, a family, a teen, a college student, whether it was daytime, whether it was nighttime, that was an overlying element. Of course, we had a variety of space types, which offered opportunity because there were programs for those particular groups, children and teens and so forth. So there was a way of managing that. Durability of materials. It wasn't one population that demanded that. It was because this was a civic building, because it was going to be a well-used building. There were things that you did because of the children and the elderly, were also things you would do for the, because of the homeless, so, various things for upholstery and so on and so forth. So that was, I think that's where the focus was. Sustainability, this was a LEED Platinum building, so that was an overlying element. And this idea of flexibility, the flexibility in the variety of places for the community, flexibility in how the building could unfold in the future. It was meant to be a 100-year building. And so even the office space, we built no drywalls. They were all demountable partitions, and as well as systems furniture. But there was the idea that this building could sort of be a living element and evolve as a city. I've learned since that the history of our public libraries, our central public libraries, often tell the history of the city, which is a really wonderful sort of way of thinking about it. We go to the next slide. I like to bring this home a little bit. A number of years ago, I got involved with the South End branch library, and I got involved because the city approved a programming and planning study in 2019. It's actually should be starting now at the beginning of next year, but I, as a longtime resident of the South End, thought it'd be a really wonderful opportunity for me to get involved with the Friends group and join the board as a resident of the community who happens to be an interior designer, yes, who happens to design a number of libraries. But one thing that we did as a committee, and we did it at the beginning of last year, we wanted to provide, we thought we could provide some resources for eventually the design team, which was the City of Boston, the Boston Public Library, and obviously the design firm that comes on board for the project. But it was very evident to me, obviously, because of my journey at Austin, that the complexity of understanding a community goes many layers beyond what you just might sort of see, and the texture of the neighborhood, extremely important. So we did a visual presentation and we did a documentation. I just brought 2 slides from that visual presentation. One, a couple of things were just the images that we are all familiar with our neighborhoods of the city. But the interesting thing is the complexity of the South End. It's 1 square mile. It's 30,000 plus residents. It has 7 schools. It has about 8 places of worship, a number of different faiths. It has about 7 nonprofit community organizations, and it also has a homeless population, which I realized when Joanne asked me to sort of get involved that we did not include this, and we will be adding it in the package. Of that there's Pine Street Inn, there's Haley House, there's Rosie's Place. There is a real visible homeless community that is part of the South End as part of our diversity, and we're sort of a microcosm of the community that participates in the Central Library. We can go on to the next. What was interesting, because it was part of a discovery of the process of Austin, that San Francisco was the first central library to actually bring in a social worker to that building, which when you think about it, makes an extraordinary amount of sense. Well, early in programming in Austin, and Austin's programming, again, it started in 13 years ago. So and the programming that never came up, but as we were beginning construction on the project, which was about a 4-year process, the idea of adapting some space in the library, a number of offices came up for social services. And, that just seemed to make a whole lot of sense. And in addition, we could go to the next slide. In 2017, there was the Mayor Walsh under the Walsh administration approved a position for the BPL of a community outreach to be located in the hospital, in the library. The renovation of the BPL opened in 2016. So the year after that came up. And a couple of weeks ago, Jawan attended this. I didn't have a chance, but what's been wonderful to see is that the BPL has extended that program somewhat, and it really has sort of understood the health and human resources services and as a resource to the community, and their broad breadth of resources to a diverse community. But the homeless population is part of that, whether it's needing shelter, food, resources, jobs, any of that. And so it's really exciting to see. And then in the renovation, the next slide, Jawan, it was really wonderful to see. I mean, many of us remember the old sort of pay edition, and in reinventing that, I call it the entrance level, whether it's the first level or but what was really wonderful about that, and we knew we had to do it in the new building for the Austin Central Library, was to animate and activate that front door, that atrium space, because it's that animated, delightful space that really allows for the coexisting of all the population of the community. Reinventing the first floor of the Boston Central Library was really important. One, bringing it a transparency. There used to be walls and sort of clear stories. I mean, that portion of the library did not have the transparency that it has. And then reinventing the programs within that space and making them visible to the community was really important. A couple things that happened: that David Leonard, the president of the BPL, had this wonderful idea of bringing WGBH in and running broadcasts, which of course has been extremely popular and draws in the community. There's again a cafe, a gift shop. There's an area up front that's very flexible, and it's really meant to support various events for resource information. The first slide that we showed about the various programs, and it's set up that it allows for somewhat of a, it could be a jobs fair, or could be information sort of thing. But what's wonderful about it, not only that it's in the library, but it's at the front door and it's visible to the community. It's not in the lower level. It's in this very sort of transparent place with everything else. And again, I love that, just right at the desk, free to all. It goes back to Andrew's sort of statement that this is a place that you don't have to buy a cup of coffee to stay in it, or a sandwich, that you're welcomed, which is really exciting. And then we go to the next slide. So part of the design process is not just to do a project. Unfortunately, I've been able to travel back and forth to Austin a number of times because I continue to work with Lake Flato. But I just want to share my first visit after the opening. I always talk in the design process, as far as understanding community, that it is necessary for observation, listening, and sharing. And it's not a linear process, and it has to happen throughout to really get a sense of what this community is about and understand the spirit of it. And that is even true after. I mean, part of the learning process was continuing to visit the library afterwards. And we go to the next slide. So the library opened in the end of October of 2017, and I had a chance to get there early in December that year, same year. And I thought the library opened, and this Jawan's introduction, this connects to Jawan's introduction. I was really sort of surprised. I thought the library opened at 10, but at 9, but it opened at 10. So I had to do something, meet the director of libraries for a few things in the morning. And I got there at I wanted to spend some time before I did that. And I got there at 9:30, and the doors were locked, and I walked the site a little bit, but I was starting to notice people were starting to show up at the front door. And there were parents with children and a bunch of other adults, and I wasn't really paying attention. I was just excited to see, wow, the doors aren't even open and they're lining up to get into the front door. It's that, like, the building's being well received. And it didn't dawn on me. I was able to go back later that day to really spend some time. This was a Friday morning, and then Friday afternoon I had a chance to go back, or just as an observer, just to see how the building truly was being used. And I noticed, and it dawned on me, this image on the right-hand side, this I call it the lunch table. There's a number of gentlemen with luggage, and there's that group, that a homeless group with their possessions. This was in the afternoon, but at 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning, it was that population that the shelters let everyone out. Where did they go? But what was wonderful, it didn't hit me that this was a, that the portion of that group was a homeless population. It also, was wonderful to really see that parents with children wasn't like, oh, let's stand over here kind of thing. This was just the community. And that was really a wonderful experience, to realize. And the next slide goes back to sort of the bigger sort of problem, as Iris sort of mentioned in her presentation. I did not go to Austin during the pandemic. I was able to keep in touch with how the library was doing just through social media, Instagram in particular. But I did have a chance to go back twice last year in September and then again in December. And when I went in September, it was really kind of it felt like a different city. I couldn't put my finger on it, but what happened during the pandemic, as it did in many of our urban environments, that the homeless population, it really was a problem, to say the least, and it expanded. And Austin has this, it had a ban on public camping. But during the pandemic, it eased on that, it didn't enforce that. And the city really, downtown became kind of, it was very visible on the homeless really problem in that city, very visible. And, by spring of last year, the community voted to reinstate the camping ban. But it highlights, it begins to, and the image on the lower right is City Hall. And the public library is just about a block away. And there's our other urban cities, other than Boston. New York is looking at a number of hotels, abandoned hotels, to act as homeless shelters for the added population that has come for the immigrant population that recently showed up in the city. LA has a huge problem, and legislation this year is putting on the ballot, I believe it's next year, for hotels, empty rooms at hotels to be available for the homeless population. These are all weird band-aids and not really addressing the problem. So it's really great that, this month we're able to share some of these thoughts.
Thank you, Joe. That was wonderful. And we have a little project here we want to highlight for you. So Iris talked about the outdoor and the landscape and parks and opportunities where we can improve and include all of our population, including the homeless. And Joe spoke of a public library. There are other spaces, there are train stations, there are museums. There's a lot of public spaces where this population hang out during the day. However, we want to highlight a little bit of a nice idea that we saw at Pine Street Inn. It's called Estelle Garden. It's a garden that was donated by a woman named Estelle to have an outdoor space for the women in the shelter. Pine Street Inn houses 100 beds for women. And it's wonderful that you can see the artistry of the metal work, and then the garden inside is just a haven for these individuals to come out and enjoy the outdoor. As Iris mentioned, wellness, health and wellness, reducing stress and depression is very important, to have some sunlight, breathe the fresh air. So also, this has led us to this project that we're working on with Boston Public Health Commission, Iris and myself. This happens at the intersection of Mass Cass, which is over here, 112 Southampton, a shelter that houses one of the largest shelters in New England, and houses individual men who are homeless. And it's a wonderful idea that came to us from the director, asking for help if we can create an outdoor space for this particular population to spend time during the day in this outdoor space while they can clean or adjust the shelter for, you know, the cycle of the day to prepare it for the 4 o'clock return or 3 o'clock or what have you. And you can see here images that we for inspiration that we shared with our shelter, the design team, is why not? Why can't we have a beautiful outdoor space for homeless population at the shelter? And it could be something like quiet places, or it could be places where they have activities and it just feels like Joe was highlighting in the video, a home or a place they belong to, or a community that they are part of. And these are some of the activities that we actually that they do in the shelters. They do want to go outdoor and have the conversation, smoke the cigarette, listen to music, read a book, pray, and or have other activities we were hoping to introduce in this place. We also did a workshop with them, and they participated in the design of the space, and it was a wonderful, wonderful experience, and they loved it. And I'm not going to go deeply into the design, but these are some of the imagery of design process and progress. This is that space in the back. We did want to create some shaded area. We're not going to have this canopy for sure. Our budget is, we don't even have a budget. So all of this coming out of fundraisings and donations, and we're hoping for some public art also. It's in the backside, and we're trying to make it pleasant. Movie nights, maybe, why not? Concerts, karaoke. This is like would be the backyard space, if you will, and maybe a track to run around, an exercise area, a reading area, quiet area, prayer area, that kind of stuff. So this project is now Halverson Chagin Bond is taking it over and creating the documents for it, and hopefully we'll share it with you when it's done. This is some of the materials because we're working with restrictive site, furniture, indigenous plants, and shading devices. So we come to the end of our presentation here, and we have some time to actually share with your thoughts with us, if you could, with the audience. And I want to thank Iris and Joe for their time, and everybody else who shared with us this information and allow us to share this information. So we have about 15 minutes. We're good on time to open it for discussion and questions. Okay, seeing none. I thought I saw a raised hand. It's hard with the Zoom to, but I think the hand went down again. So go ahead, Todd. Todd, can you hear us? Do you want to share your comment with us? Iris, what are you?
Todd, do you try to type? Yes, yeah, you can type in the chat.
By the way, as Todd is typing in the chat, there is a link to the CBS video about the public libraries. Todd, I do not see in the chat the question.
Oh.
Oh, there it is. The Watertown Free Public Library has very successful accommodating homeless by letting them sleep in the library on comfy chairs. Could that be a good model for other public libraries? I guess, Joe, that may be a question to you.
Absolutely, and it happens. I mean, that's a reality. What's really nice about that is that in a central library, I think that Watertown is doing that. Most of our branch, like Boston has 25 branch libraries. So as a system, some areas are more urban than others. And the easy thing with accommodating a diverse community is that when it's a central library, that it's a large building with diverse spaces. The problem with branch libraries, oftentimes, we see it in the South End. We know, and there's a number of, we have a park next to the library. So there's an outdoor space plus the building, and there is a homeless population. And there might be maybe 6 lounge chairs in the whole sort of common area of the building. And it could get quite uncomfortable sometimes if that's the only cluster of lounge chairs and somebody from a population, whether it's homeless or whether it's somebody with something else, that, it's easy to take over space. And when you only have 8,000 or 10,000 square feet to get an area for children's, for, the diversity and, sort of the program needs of a basic branch library, makes it extremely difficult. But, and actually there's not they're branch libraries, so there's not a social worker accessible. There's fortunately some training, but, it's a population that, it's close quarters. And, that's one thing about having more space, at least in the central library or outdoor space, that it gives individuals more options. And therefore, you could go sit over there or you could go sit over there. But the central library was very much like that. There were so many options for seating, and it was meant because it was going to be a place for sleeping. I did notice, though, with Iris's presentation about site furniture on the exterior, the city was pretty adamant about putting, I'll say, uncomfortable public seating outside of the front door. But I had to laugh because even with that, you find, those types of things are still somewhat used. Just because you segment a bench doesn't mean you're not going to get people to sort of sleep out onto that, whole section.
Thank you, Joe. Anyone else have a question or a comment? Hi, Greta, go ahead.
Well, I'm fascinated by the idea of public libraries being a resource for homeless people. I live in Waltham, and there's a community day center that offers, space for people to use computers and stuff, but integrating that into a public building is pretty fascinating to me. And I'm just wondering, in a northern climate like this, if you're allowing people to sleep on, just hang out and sleep within a building, but then when it closes in the winter, there's going to be, where do they go? And, do you start installing showers so that people have a place to shower? And anyway, I'm just wondering about the
Good question. Good question. We were talking about that the other day. The panel we were discussing, because Boston climate is different than Houston climate. And I was saying, in the wintertime, a lot of the shelters, they let the people stay indoor because of the weather condition. They somehow make it work. And but still, it's a stress on the system. And Joe was saying, well, it's no difference and Joe, you may want to comment on what you were telling me about.
Oh, yeah. I mean, climate, there's reverse climate. I mean, it's 120 degrees sometimes, or 110 degrees. You have the heat as a problem. We do know in the city, I mean, it's really interesting. If Boston Central Library, although there's that activity of programs on the first floor on the interior, there's actually there's a large community sort of, I'll call it a community table right outside on the sidewalk. There's some really street furniture, huge surfaces, really quite smart. And you often see social workers out there and gathering a homeless population, whether it's for meals, whether it's for socks, whether it's for blankets. When you walk the streets of the city, you do see social workers out and about. But again, it doesn't necessarily solve the problem. And just walking the streets of the city, the pandemic, a lot of public restrooms were closed in places like, stores and shops and so on and so forth. As Andrew from the clip said, you just can't walk into a restaurant if you're homeless, you have to buy something, or McDonald's or whatever the case may be. And I shared this with the group, since I'm a walker and I use the city a lot and walk around the city a lot, since after the pandemic, a lot of places haven't reopened their restrooms. Because of many issues, and I'm sure the homeless population is one of them. And I was in Downtown Crossing specifically. I was in Marshall's, and fortunately, the restroom was still open. This was like a month or two ago, and somebody was chatty that was in there, and a nice gentleman. And I said, "Oh yeah, there's not too many options." And he was definitely, I realized, oh, he's a homeless person. There's not even during the day, when you're out and about, that opportunity to even. And he was using the restroom to wash. It wasn't anything seedy or anything. It was just a place to go to wash. And he says you could always count on Marshall's. And I thought that was just like, what an average. But that's kind of crazy. I mean, it really is. There's a lot of limitation. Even I think in the Boston Commons, I'm not even quite sure there's restrooms there anymore. I think they're going to bring them back, or they're talking about bringing them back. But that's a huge problem. A basic huge problem, just a restroom, even during the day, let alone at night.
There is, you remind me about the Boston Common, Joe. There is a nice program that a local church on the Common, I forgot the name, the Faith of something, I don't remember, but the homeless population is aware of this church, and every Sunday they have a mass, and this for people who are religious, and then they serve a meal. So in the park, and I guess in all weather conditions. So I think part of the city is trying very hard to do the right thing, though it is still a challenge. And a couple of weeks ago, when I was attending the housing forum at the Boston Public Library, a question was asked to the director of housing in the city of Boston, is like, when is this problem going to be solved? Do we have a timeline? She said, unfortunately, no, we don't, because we get our funding from the federal government, and the federal government, we don't know how much it's giving us every year. And it stepped back a lot since the 80s. So we heard, like in the 80s, we didn't have as many numbers of homeless individuals on the streets because there was funding for housing them. And that's something hopefully with the new mayor, something maybe can be accelerated a little bit. And then, of course, I visited the restrooms down on the lower level, and like Joe was saying, they were a female homeless woman using the restroom, and it felt like any other person using. I mean, they were doing what they have to do, because some of them was washing an item and another was doing something else. And I was very happy to see that they are included. And I think 20 years ago, probably the scene would have been different.
Joanne, the other thing I would like to say about Austin a little bit, since my journey in Austin was almost a period of more than a decade, actually, about 13 years from the beginning of programming to, my visit, till now. And when we started the project, the the library site was a part of town that was just starting to be developed. Actually, Second Street had to be extended over a creek area and so on and so forth. But at the beginning of the process, there were a number of high-rise apartment buildings. Austin was still growing. But the idea of, as the city continued to grow, and it grew tremendously in this time frame of 13 years, that during the design process, those apartments became condos for sale instead of rentals, because the city was beginning to thrive that much. And then as the years of sort of, part of discovering the city and understanding, taking an Uber ride, talking to folks here, there, everywhere you could sort of talk to folks, there were a lot of newcomers to the city, but they were discovering this was because, if you didn't come from California or another urban area, this was becoming an expensive city to live in, and so it became, as time went on, as a city thrived, as Boston thrived and became an extremely expensive city to live in, housing becomes a real big problem. And we haven't solved it. These aren't overnight problems. These are problems that have developed over decades that we haven't resolved.
Yep. And we're still working on it. There's another thing we were discussing, which is wonderful happening in our city around, it's in the, I'm going to say South End, around the Ink Block, the stretch, Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, Washington, is it Washington Street? Where Pine Street is is located.
It's Harrison, actually.
Harrison Ave, sorry.
The
Yes,
Harrison corridor,
Ave.
right.
A lot of you know that section of town. When I was really young, I lived and worked in that area, and I was very afraid to walk around. The other day I took a walk, and it felt so wonderful. The transition of that area, including the low, I mean, it's all now expensive rental properties. However, Pine Street Inn is still there. They still have a property in that area beside the inn itself. So the whole thing was blending in, and that's exactly what we're looking for, is that sort of seamless connection between the diverse sort of levels, economic levels or demographics living in the same neighborhood. And I think the Back Bay, from that forum, what we heard, they're working very hard to find a place to house homeless in the Back Bay area, which you all know is one of the areas of the highest rent level in the city. Again, it's wonderful things are happening. It just takes time, and hopefully we'll get more money from the federal government. Is there anybody else with any comments? We're reaching our hour. Okay. Well, Iris and Joe, would you like to have final words before we conclude?
I really don't have any final words. I really enjoyed, the opportunity. Thank you, Joanne, for inviting me. And it's a conversation from a building type and a subject matter that's very dear to my heart. So I've always enjoyed being able to share sort of my journey for a certain project and my experiences here in the city too. Thank you.
Thank you. And hopefully you'll have an impact on the branch library as well. You had the opportunities. Iris, any final words?
Yeah, I think now the cities, like based on several projects that we are working on in our office, that a lot of city in the neighborhood of Boston is that, like for also like when they have a public space in the development, they consider the homeless population, and they want to accommodate their need and have the coexistence design.
That's great. That's great. And we all know big design happening at City Hall Plaza. So finger crossed that we'll see some magic as well over there, I'm sure. the design team is thinking of the population as we spoke today. There is a comment in the chat. Thank you. Okay, thank you, everyone. And thank you for your time, and to the next roundtable. We'll see you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.